The Institute for Divorce Financial Analysts, IDFA, is a proud sponsor of Purse Strings. IDFA is the premier organization dedicated to the certification, education, and promotion of the use of financial professionals in the divorce arena. IDFA provides specialized training to accounting, financial, and legal professionals in the field of pre-divorce financial planning. To find out more about earning the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst designation, visit institutedfa.com.
Coming up on today's edition of Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about, our guest is Adrienne Provost.
We are thrilled to have Adrienne with us today.
Yes, and if the name sounds familiar, it's because Adrienne is a family member and has an important story to share.
She really does. As we are talking this month about elder care and child care, we are diving into caring for a special needs child as well.
Yes, and this topic is so important. I think many families don't really want to talk about all of the issues they need to consider when having a special needs child, but the financial aspects are extremely important and they can be complicated.
Let's dive in and have Adrienne tell us her story.
Gloria Steinem once said, "We will never solve the feminization of power until we solve the masculinity of wealth." Barbara Provost and Maggie Nielsen are the team at Purse Strings that will help you navigate the ins and outs of financial independence so that you can be financially fearless. This is Women in Money, the shit we don't talk about.
So this podcast is the shit we don't talk about, and today we're talking about it. As we've said before, women are the caretakers. So just add to that the long list of duties and responsibilities in the household, but it gets more complicated if you have a special needs child and aging parents. We are honored to have our sis and aunt, Adrienne Provost, with us today. She has a story to tell that is unlike any other. Take a minute to listen as she describes her experience of raising an extra special needs child, her daughter, and her beautiful niece and cousin, Caroline, but also as she navigates taking care of her two elderly parents.
Welcome, Adrienne. At Purse Strings, we address a multitude of financial questions, concerns, and topics. But today we are addressing something many don't talk about. It's the financial considerations of raising a special needs child and taking care of elderly parents. Adrienne, we'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your family.
Well, hello. I am a wife. I'm a working mom of 3 wonderful young adults. And I'm a caregiver, both to one of our children who has a rare medical condition, as well as to my 2 elderly parents. And of course, I'm related to you 2 fabulous ladies. So thank you for having me on today.
Oh, we're so glad that you're here. We've seen from afar how you and Pete have navigated the tough situation so beautifully, and also now being responsible for your elderly parents. We've seen you navigate that trajectory as well. So let's dig into your story and the impacts on your time and financials, everything that's been incorporated with your situation.
So first, let's start about, your current situation as being part of your sandwich generation. How is what you do kind of unique day to day, caring for Caroline as well as your parents?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that are particularly unique about our situation. Obviously, every family is unique in their own way, but as we've alluded, Caroline has a rare medical condition called EB. We won't go into that on this show, but it requires several hours a day of personal care. That is basically wound care and bandaging. So really, it's a non-negotiable health issue right off the bat. My day and her day are several hours shorter than everybody else's because that discretionary time that other people might use for leisure pursuits or additional work or fitting in some of those sandwich generation responsibilities, she and I are tied up in doing her personal care. The other thing is, because of her condition, Caroline is medically fragile. So it's hard for us to be spontaneous. If there's an event we want to attend or an activity for her to participate in, we really need to be planning ahead and thinking ahead, foreseeing if there are any potential risks to her physical safety in order for her to participate. So that kind of slows things down as you're moving through life, because you have to kind of take that time and care to think through everything. I think the other thing is, in addition to it being just a medical condition or special need, which many people have of various varieties, Caroline's condition is very rare. So what that means is you as the parent or the primary caregivers quickly become the expert in her condition, which puts a lot of responsibility on you as the caregiver, that you have to know it all and advocate for it, because really even most doctors don't know that much about her condition, and certainly other people within her sphere, whether it be at school or socially, don't know anything about her condition. So it kind of puts that additional layer of responsibility and stress on our shoulders, that you really have to be thinking of everything, as well as just doing a lot of research, because there's no proven, oh, your child has this condition, we'll go to this website and it tells you everything you need to know. It just doesn't really exist for her condition. It's getting better with the advent of technology. When Caroline was first born, Facebook, if it was a thing, was brand new. I'm not even sure that it was a thing. Now there are multiple groups online, including in Facebook, where we're able to connect with people all over the world who have her condition. So that helps a lot, not only from emotional and moral support, but just tangible and practical tips and suggestions to save us those hours of researching a product or a type of clothing or something that might work. So those are a few things that are kind of unique. And I think embedded within that is the fact that most of the time when you're the meat and the sandwich generation, at least one half of your sandwich, one of the slices of bread, is moving in the direction of becoming more self-sufficient and independent. Usually that's your kids. And oftentimes the other slice of bread is not. As generally as you're aging, you're not getting better with your independence. But in this situation, really both slices of our bread are not going to be moving in that direction. Certainly as Caroline is, she's a mid-teenager, she is gaining more maturity and independence with every year, but there's physically just things she's not going to be able to do for herself, or certain levels of independence that she is likely not going to achieve, or at least not achieve without significant financial impact in terms of hiring someone to assist her with those things. So I think that also kind of makes our story a little unique, that you're not moving in the direction of improvement in something. You're kind of saying, here's my reality, and it's this, or maybe not as good as this, as you move forward in navigating through issues. So I think those are kind of the things that make our story unique from a sandwich generation caregiver perspective.
Yes, thank you for sharing. That's an amazing insight into what happens in your day-to-day with Caroline. Now tell us the impacts that you're also working through with your parents at this same time.
Right. So my parents are 88 and 93, God bless them. And, relatively in good shape for their age. Cognitively, they're very sharp. Their personalities are what they've always been. So we are very blessed that we still have them, honestly. Many people don't at this stage in their lives. But they both have some health issues and some impairments that require a lot of support. And as I said, that's only kind of moving in the direction of needing more support. One of the things so I guess to back up a little bit, a couple of years ago, we've been pushed, my sister and I just have one sibling. So we, there's not a lot of people to spread our caregiving, not a lot of shoulders to spread that across. We had been asking my parents for a long time to try and downsize and move, and they resisted for quite a while. We did finally help them move in 2020, so 2 years ago, into a senior living community. And then it took me really most of 2020 to empty their house and get it sold. So I started 2021 really at a deficit, physically and mentally, from emerging from that experience. But then as they've settled in and, they moved into a senior community, and in 6 weeks after they put their foot inside the doorstep, the whole place got shut down due to COVID, and we could not even enter to bring them groceries. So it was a very challenging transition for them, which we give them a lot of credit for. But I think that is part of what we're still dealing with today, is kind of getting over some of those transition humps. They weren't able to really physically unpack a lot of their boxes. And again, nobody could come in and help them. So there's kind of still a pent up settling in process, I think, that we're working through. And one of the things is, so they don't drive anymore. And so they need help with just about every aspect of things. They need help getting to medical appointments. They need help getting food and groceries and navigating things. So fortunately, the senior community where they're living, they do have a lot of services on the premises. And one of the big things that I accomplished last year was closing out their multitude of retail bank accounts and getting them all consolidated to the bank that's on the premises. So at least now they can do some of their own financial transactions themselves down the hall. There's a pharmacy on the premises. So we're slowly kind of morphing some of their daily activities to where they can at least access them without having to get into the car. But my sister and I kind of decided to split up their needs so that it wasn't overwhelming for either one of us. So she tends to focus more on the daily living, making sure they have groceries. And we do have some caregiving assistance a few hours each day for my dad. So she coordinates with the caregiving agency manager, those sorts of things. And I try to focus primarily on the financial and medical, since that's become my expertise with a medically fragile child. I know how to speak with doctors. So my folks are blessed in that they saved well and they have resources and assets, but they were very good at micromanaging and growing their assets, but they didn't do a whole lot of kind of big picture financial organization. So what I've really been doing over the course of the last few years is trying to bring some structure and organization to where all their financial assets are, what type they are, and enable myself to help them. It sounds fairly simple when you put it on paper, but it's become quite a quagmire of power of attorney forms, getting on speakerphone calls together so that they can give me permission to hear information so that I can help them. It takes a lot of time. So this summer's project is making sure all of their estate planning documents are updated. I think they're about 6 or 7 years old, so it's time to have them reviewed and refreshed. And then working on making sure that I have access to all of their financial accounts. And they, for some reason, believed in spreading money to just about everybody. So we're also working on trying to consolidate and centralize so that we have fewer places to manage. So that's kind of a snapshot where we're at right now.
Wow. Now, wait a minute. So first, Caroline, then your parents, but then you also work for a living. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do. Any one of those is a full-time job, but hey, why not throw in a career?
Yes. Well, I did say, especially when our children were younger, that sometimes I went to work for my me time.
I bet.
Might be sad, but it was something that was just for me, and it did enable me to kind of get up and out and beyond just the day-to-day things that certainly could fill your plate, but aren't necessarily sustaining you, so to speak. They fill your plate, but not your cup, right?
Right.
So I've spent over 30 years really in the same industry working in employee benefits, usually part of like the human resources department. So I've worked at several corporations where I'm in the corporate benefits department. I've had a couple different stints doing consulting, and my current position, I've been almost 15 years at my current employer doing consulting in the employee benefits space. So I will say that part of the reason I'm able to make that work and keep that work plate spinning is by having one of the most wonderful bosses in the world. She's always been very supportive and accommodating of my needs wherever she can, whether it be working from home long before COVID made it a thing, or making it okay for me to limit my client travel and that sort of thing. So not everybody is that lucky, I recognize, but I have been, so it works.
Wow, that's many plates spinning, besides also just raising 2 more kids, which is also just a lot of work. But every time we see you, you make it look effortless. So,
thank you.
So I'm sure, you've had to navigate a ton of insurance, government, financial entities. Can you share a bit about how you navigated learning and working in these institutions?
Yeah, I mean, really, I think our navigation journey in that kind of world started when Caroline first came home from the hospital. So she was in the ICU for 4.5 months when she was born. And when she came home, it was with quite a bit of medical equipment and nursing services around the clock, et cetera. So they discharged us from the hospital with a state program that was for medically fragile, technology-dependent children. And that was kind of our introduction into the patchwork quilt that is the state of Illinois services for people with any sort of disability or needs. And get out your alphabet soup, because you learn a lot of acronyms. They don't all make sense as to, how they fit together. But I think navigating it, I really just kind of called on the skills that I use in my professional life as well, which was documenting, asking questions, really trying to make sure that I'm paying attention to the details and just learning as you go. So it's a lot of filling out forms, making phone calls. You learn interesting things such as the local Social Security / Medicaid office, which, is there to serve the constituents, doesn't answer their phone. You must appear in person in order to get your business taken care of, which is extremely helpful when you have a medically fragile child or very elderly parents who have mobility issues. So learning some of those kinds of things along the way, you just kind of punt. But I would say documenting who you speak to, what they said, what you said becomes critically important. And by the way, that's also very important when you're navigating the healthcare side of this, what doctor told you what on what day, and then really being patient. And then this kind of leads over also into insurance appeals or claims. And then ultimately, and we're not quite there yet, but when Caroline turns 18, if, we will try applying for Social Security. And then, that leads to SSDI and Medicaid and some of those sorts of things. So part of how I became aware of some of that or navigated it as well was kind of organic, because I tried to join some support groups, mostly online, that are for parents of special needs children. Usually they're a variety of special needs. So some of what they talk about or topics that come up aren't really applicable to our life, but it did introduce me to things such as the need for a supplemental needs trust, so that if there are any assets for Caroline, they are not negating her eligibility for SSI or Medicaid or other governmental benefits.
Huge. That's huge.
Yes, it's a huge piece of your puzzle. And so really just kind of learning as you go. And then as you learn one thing, it kind of leads you to the next and takes you down that rabbit hole. I do also just try to listen to podcasts. So that's where I try to multitask when Caroline and I are doing our 3 hours a day of personal care. I either put on an audiobook or a great podcast like the Purse Strings podcast, and, try to educate myself and use my time to be learning something, because I don't necessarily have the appetite to do that then later in the day when I'm drained. So, that's kind of how it started, I think, Maggie, is just, kind of getting thrown into it. And then you do the doggy paddle until you kind of figure it out. And all of these entities, they're each different, but they all kind of have the same basic issues, which is bureaucracy, process, forms, and so it's really just trying to figure out, okay, which is their process. And if you ever get someone who is helpful, boy, run with that person as long as you can, because not everybody really has that spark in their eye to try to help you solve problems. They're just, all they know is moving their piece of paper to the next box, but they don't really understand holistically the process that you're going through. So when you find somebody who does understand or has that genuine desire to help, you really hang on to them.
Yeah, for dear life, I'm sure, really sometimes. So that's really navigating everything for Caroline, from financially how to manage her care, but, medically. Let's turn to your parents. Now, you're doing a lot of financial gathering of data collection, meeting with people. So in hindsight, what advice would you give? What would you have hoped would have been in place during this time? Because I just had a conversation with a friend who was afraid to open this conversation with her parents because her parents looked at her as the child, even though she's a grown woman. And she was afraid to address the conversation with her father, who was the man of the family, about the will, the POAs, where's the money, things like that. And we really pushed back. Maggie and I had a conversation with her and really said, you're going to be in this situation now or later. It's best to be in front of it. And yesterday she told us she had the conversation. It didn't go as bad as planned. And now their documents are in order. So as part of Caregiving Month, young or old, it's important to really ensure that you are having these conversations. But I know that you kind of found yourself what seemed to be kind of a rat's nest because you didn't know. So what advice can you give based on what you've been experiencing with your parents?
Yeah, I think, and I think your friend's experience is not an uncommon one, right? And so one thing that I would say is I think there are ways, there is a little bit of synergy between these conversations with your parents that are around the financials and around their future living opportunities, right? They're very integrated, because a lot of times where you can live is dependent on how much money you have. So, it's not really like one or the other. Obviously, there are some just kind of practical logistics around managing your money, access to a checking account, check writing privileges versus can you afford to move into a particular senior living community? But they do go together. So I think starting the conversations as early as you can, before your parents themselves feel like there's a reason you're bringing this up to us, right? And my sister and I did do that. We could see proactively that they were starting to have issues managing a house as large as they were living in. They didn't see it so much themselves, but I will say, to my parents' great credit, they have always tried to be very open-minded and listen to us, even if they didn't always agree. They always gave us the open opportunity to talk, which I know some parents really don't afford that. And then I think you just have to be persistent. The other thing that I would suggest is, if need be in those situations, write them a letter, put it down in words, because sometimes when it's not in a situation that a parent can feel they're being confronted with something, and they can take the time to read it and digest it and understand your feelings and where you're coming from, it might open the door a little bit more to just sitting down and having that conversation. And Barb, I think a lot of times how you always used to say, get your kids in the car and then you find out everything that's on their minds, right? Because you're focusing on driving, and then they'll tell you things that they will not tell you if they're sitting face to face across the table from you. And I think these kinds of conversations are similar. Engage them in playing a card game or doing a puzzle, or maybe you're even walking through the botanic garden. I mean, something where it's not the only focus and it's kind of a byproduct, to be like, hey, this has been on my mind, or, these are things that I've been thinking about. And it's only because I want to be sure that I'm prepared to serve you as my parent to my best ability as your loving child. Can we have these conversations? And I think once you get the door open, then you can, start to tackle it kind of topic by topic. But that would be kind of my suggestion about getting started. Start early, start often, and find what works for the personality of your parents to break down any defensive barriers to have those honest conversations. The other thing, and this is kind of a more tactical thing, but some of the things that I've learned along the way is just because you're a good money manager doesn't mean that your finances are organized.
True.
And many people of an older generation had this idea that you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. And so they spread their money around to 10 different financial institutions. And what I've learned is that even though my parents were very responsible in getting their estate planning documents done, including power of attorney, most financial institutions don't want to accept your paper. They want your power of attorney filled out on their form. And of course, it has to be notarized, which means a trip to the bank or somewhere to get a notary. And this is where quickly it becomes unmanageable to think you're going to, to take care of that across all these different accounts and institutions, hence our need to centralize and consolidate for my folks. But that was eye-opening to me, because I thought, oh, they did the right thing. They've got their legal documents. We're done. But you're not done. When push comes to shove, if you try and call Fidelity and your parent has voice recognition set up in order to speak to a customer service rep, but that parent is now incapacitated, how do you get through and make sure that their RMD is distributed so they don't have tax penalties? I mean, it quickly becomes, as to coin a phrase, Barb, a rat's nest, right?
Yeah. Well, and it sounds easy, but when you look at the steps involved, every simple one just becomes more complicated. Like you said, going to the Social Security office. I mean, just going to the office, even if you have to manage your child with you or your parent or both to get some information shared. And it's difficult. And that's why we're raising this issue this month, because the caring falls typically on the daughter, and oftentimes the oldest daughter, although not always. And so we are trying to lift up and educate women about what this all entails and what it takes if you're not prepared. So we're always trying to help them get in front of this. But let me ask you this. What do you do for Adrienne? What do you do for self-care and to manage all that you have to manage on a daily basis? How do you take care of you?
Well, I'm usually last on the list, so that is always a challenge, but definitely recognizing, you can't help anybody else if you are unwell or you're completely burned out. So I think number one thing is I'm really getting better about setting my boundaries and saying, I can manage this, I cannot manage that. And that goes a long way, not just physically, but also just mentally, to know that I've created that space for myself. And then I would say, similar to like my work-life issues, a lot of people talk about having a balance, a work-life balance, but I would say I blend my work life versus balancing it, because I do work from home. And, in a given hour, I might be sitting on a conference call, flipping a load of laundry and shooting off an email about my child's IEP to the school. So it's more an integrated approach. And I think that same kind of blending is how I handle any of my self-care. It's not, oh, I get to take a day off and go to the spa. To be honest, that would cause me more stress than it would solve, because of how much I would have to manage to be gone for a day. And it's just not how I'm wired. So I blend my self-care. It's, as I said, listening to an audiobook or a podcast while I'm taking a walk, sitting with my pooch in the chair and having a nice cup of coffee in the morning. I love to read, so that's one of my escapes. I really just kind of fit my self-care in smaller increments, rather than kind of this, go all day or go all week and then you get a day of rest. It's just not how our life manages. And I know the current thinking is that multitasking is bad for your health, but honestly, I'd be sunk without it. So I guess to reframe that, I look at it more as that habit hacking or habit stacking that I've heard about instead of multitasking. And that seems to make it okay. Like for Caroline's medical care, I have to cut up all of her bandages because they have to be a certain size and shape. And that alone can take me 20 to 30 minutes every day. So while I'm doing that, I try to be listening to something or watching something or even reading something if I can a little bit while I'm doing it, so that I'm maximizing the time that is available for myself or for my family that's just fun, instead of all the have-to-dos, since we have a long list of have-to-dos every day.
Well, that's great advice. I love how you weave it into your everyday instead of just putting it on one day a month or something, which is really important. It's how you start your day and, how you kind of work along your own cadence, as you were saying, how you best can feel you can manage it. It's excellent.
Yes, for sure.
Excellent.
And one thing I would say too, Barb, when we were talking about the, what have you learned? I think if there's one thing that I would say to people, and this is more geared towards the elder slice of the bread, you have to do these things before you have to do these things, right? Whether it's a move, because honestly, by the time my folks moved, they didn't have the physical and emotional stamina that they would have had even 2 years prior to manage that transition. If you're looking at setting up your finances or your estate planning documents or whatever it is, don't wait until you're in that moment when you have to have it or you need it to be thinking about it, because you have so much more important things to be focusing on thinking about at that time than where's my dad's birth certificate and veterans discharge papers, right? At least that's how I am. I'm an orderly kind of person. And to me, it brings such great peace of mind every single day to say, yep, I've got the binder, right? It's all in the binder. And if something happens to me, Pete knows, go find the binder. And I know it's unpleasant and you have to carve out time in order to get that achieved. It's something that is difficult to do alongside your normal life. But what is more important than making sure that your husband knows how to get into your checking account, or your parents have their life insurance and their long-term care premiums paid on time? So my little public service announcement.
And I think, one of the parts where you're blessed is that your parents still have their mental capacity to help you walk through this and help you to put that, grab all these different pieces and put them together. If they were losing their mental capacity and you didn't have that, you'd even be more scrambled and lost, and so that's really been a benefit. But it understands why you have to be so proactive, is because you don't know the day when somebody is going to start losing their mental capacity, even though they seem physically fine.
That's an excellent point, Maggie. And, my mom did suffer a stroke 25 years ago, and fortunately didn't have extreme long-lasting repercussions from it. But it does show you that even you don't have to be 93 to face these issues. I mean, even at our age, something can happen in the blink of an eye, and you're going to say, oh, I wished I would have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is important to think ahead for that. And your point is a good one. My folks are very sharp mentally, and they're very willing. As I said, they're very open-minded and allowing us to help them. And they understand when I say, listen, we really need to move in this direction, because if you want me to help you, you've got to help me help you. And they're very on board with that. But a lot of seniors are not that sharp. And even as sharp as they are, my dad could tell you the history of every stock on the index and what its history has been. I mean, he loves the financials, and he's got an encyclopedic brain. And yet he is starting to admit, I just don't remember some of the details of these things, or he just doesn't have the desire to be consuming as much information as it takes to sometimes be managing some of those more complex financial arrangements. So I think that is a natural progression, that even when you are cognitively still very sharp, is that really how you want to spend your time? It's maybe for a few, but
yeah, not for everybody.
And I will say this too. I'm sorry, Barbara. I was just going to say, Maggie, the other thing that we're so blessed with my parents is that they were very proactive in purchasing long-term care insurance when they were in like their late 60s, early 70s. And, they've paid into that policy now for probably 25 plus years. But now we're on the cusp of getting to claim from the policy, and what a godsend. Not only for us, as for my sister and I as the next generation, to know that they are going to be taken care of, but also for my parents, obviously, that they know, even at this point, if my dad or my mom had to move into assisted living for some period of time, that they would not be leaving the other partner destitute, or that they, would be having to just rely only on Medicaid, and those sorts of things, hopefully, the way it looks. But that long-term care also is such an important product because of the longevity of people now. And it also serves many purposes. My folks have a caregiver come into their condo for 4 hours a day to assist my dad. That will be eligible for payment through the long-term care. So it's not just, I have to move into a nursing home to make use of it. And I know other more modern policies, obviously they've had for a long time, allow you to bundle it with life insurance, which is what Pete and I are looking at, so that it's not one or the other product, but you can still get some benefit from it, even if you don't use the long-term care portion of it. But that is also a huge blessing that we have.
Which I'm sure takes so much off your shoulders, knowing that doesn't have to come out of your pocket, that they're prepared because you are busy, again, taking care of Caroline and your other kids as well. So I'm sure that's just
absolutely.
Like, whew.
Yeah, long-term care. Like you said, we're living longer. We're going to need more health oversight and financials to care for ourselves. So even though people are like, whew, that's expensive, look at the payment, and not only in financially, but kind of the weight off your shoulders as well, right? As their children. So also another good
absolutely. Testimonial
to why long-term care products are so important. We talk about that a lot as well. So, wow, you're a wealth of information. I can't thank you enough for sharing your story, sharing your ups and downs and insights and learnings. It's been fabulous. Any other little tips that you want to share before we close this out?
I think just a couple of other quick comments. One, along the public service announcement line, is people also need to realize that once their kids turn 18, those kids should have power of attorney at minimum, even a will, but power of attorney, so that if something happens to them, you can interact with healthcare providers or help them manage their personal business affairs. So that's something that I had never had on my radar. And when I learned that through one of my rabbit hole reading sessions, I was like, oh, goodness. Okay. So that was one thing I wanted to point out, because a lot of people might not be aware of it. The other thing is, and if you can solve this, Barb, you will be minted in the Financial Hall of Fame. What I've learned is that there really is no general contractor. in the world of all things caregiving. So, we have a financial advisor, we have a tax accountant, we have an insurance agent, we've got the estate planning attorney, right? But there's not one single professional or person who can synthesize and coordinate all of it. That's really on us as the caregiver or the child or, whatever your role is. And so I think, first of all, to know it going in helps solve a few things, because for a while I kept looking for that person. Like, where is this person that's going to take over managing all this for me? And they're not out there. So first of all, tie up your shoes because it's on you. And then obviously you have to surround yourself with a good group of advisors from all of those specialties, but you have to be the one to keep learning. And even when you think you know it or understand it, keep learning, because things change. The Secure Act did a lot of things about IRA distributions that could have an impact on how your trust or your will document reads, stuff like that. So, and I'm by no means a financial guru. It's not my area of expertise, but you do learn things by listening, especially with repetition, right? Like, if I hear it several times from several different sources, it finally sinks in. I'm like, oh, okay, I need to pay attention to that. So I think for people to kind of understand that as they go in, surround yourself with good people, but there's nobody that you're just handing over the keys to. It really is your responsibility. So do the best you can. And the main thing is, if you do the best you can each moment as you're living it, someday when things change and you look back, you'll say, well, I wasn't perfect, but I know in the moment I did the best I could with what I had.
Excellent words to end on, Adrienne. Beautiful. We're so honored to be part of your family and have you in our family. And we know your story, and we're so glad that you were able to share it. So many people can learn from all that you've learned and continue to learn. So
it's a true inspiration. So I think
she's amazing.
It's amazing. And
thank you.
I really hope, some people take some action, just little steps day by day, because that's the best we can do.
Yeah. And when the financial institutions and professionals hear your podcast, maybe they will start creating a concierge type service. But for now at Purse Strings, we provide all those resources for women. Go to pursestrings.co and peruse all of the resources we have that Adrienne has spoken about. That's your team that should be at the table to help you along your financial journey. So thank you, everyone. And that's a wrap for now.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.
The Institute for Divorce Financial Analysts, IDFA, is a proud sponsor of Purse Strings. IDFA is the premier organization dedicated to the certification, education, and promotion of the use of financial professionals in the divorce arena. IDFA provides specialized training to accounting, financial, and legal professionals in the field of pre-divorce financial planning. To find out more about earning the Certified Divorce Financial Analyst designation, visit institutedfa.com.